Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Laura Huerta Migus, and I am the Executive Director of the Association of Children's Museums based here in Arlington, Virginia. And we're so glad to have you with us and our esteemed panelist for this webinar, The Prescription for Play, What Science Says About the Importance of Play for Children and Families. Today we have an exciting lineup of speakers, and our agenda will begin with Carole Charnow of the Boston Children's Museum, who will provide us an introduction for our webinar, followed by our main speakers, Drs. Kathy Hirsh-Pasek and Michael Yogman, who will be sharing with us their findings and writings on the importance of play in children's lives. We will follow that presentation with a short introduction to the way children's museums around the country have been responding to these recommendations, as well as time for Q&A from all of you as attendees at the end of our session. Before we jump into the content, I'd like to give a short orientation to the screen. I'm glad that all of you have seen my initial message in the chat column. We'd like to ask you all to introduce yourselves, name and where you're from. The chat box will be your channel to our presenters and experts today. And we encourage you to please submit any questions or comments throughout the webinar via the chat. We will be monitoring that throughout the webinar to help to moderate the Q&A session. And if you have any questions or challenges in connectivity or hearing our presenters, please also indicate that in the chat function. For those of you who are listening to the audio via your computer, and should you experience any challenges in connectivity, please note that at the top of your screen there is a little telephone icon, and you can switch your audio to telephone to listen in that way. Often that can help with any bandwidth issues. And with that, I will hand it over to Carole to introduce our speakers and open our session.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Carole Charnow. I'm the CEO and president of Boston Children's Museum, and I'm so delighted to be able to welcome you to this webinar today about play and its invaluable contribution to the healthy development of a child. So we, on the call, I'm sure all of you are aware of the increasing impediments to play, the decline of recess in school, the increased pressure for academic achievement as early as preschool, the growth in adult-managed after-school activities, and many, many other factors. All of these, unfortunately, contribute to the loss of a child's ability to develop the critical social, emotional, and executive function skills that they really need to succeed in school and in life. But I'm happy to say that help is on the way. In a recent policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics entitled The Power of Play, a Pediatric Role in Enhancing Development in Young Children, pediatrician Dr. Michael Yogman, along with Dr. Kathy Hirsh-Pasek and others, makes the convincing case for a universal prescription of play to be given to all parents with children in their first years of life. So as you probably know, children's museums are essentially ground zero for free child-directed play and the joyful discovery that is so critical to a child's early healthy development. And we are very, very grateful to Michael and to Kathy and the others for making this strong case for play and also offering a strategy that will raise its profile via doctor's offices, schools, community centers, etc. So I'm really thrilled to introduce to you our two speakers today. First, acclaimed pediatrician and long-serving trustee of Boston Children's Museum, Dr. Michael Yogman, who has a practice in Cambridge and is also the chief of the Division of Ambulatory Pediatrics at Mount Auburn Hospital. He's the chair of the Massachusetts American Academy of Pediatrics Child Mental Health Task Force and immediate past chair of the National American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on the Psychosocial Aspects of Child and Family Health, where he has authored numerous policy statements. He serves as a legislative appointee to the Massachusetts Advisory Board on Child Mental Health, is a gubernatorial appointee to the Massachusetts Special Commission relative to postpartum depression, assistant professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School, and a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics since 1973, and has been awarded the Sims Mann Foundation National Whole Child Award and the AAP's Senior Child Health Advocacy Award. So very, very distinguished Dr. Yogman, we're excited to welcome. Dr. Kathy Hirsh-Pasek is the Stanley and Deborah Lefkowitz Faculty Fellow in the Department of Psychology at Temple University and is a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Director of Temple University's Infant League Laboratory, Kathy is the recipient of many, many awards, including the American Psychological Association's Bronfenbrenner Award for Lifetime Contribution to Developmental Psychology in the Service of Science and Society, the American Psychological Society's James McKean Cattell Award, the Society for Research in Child Development Distinguished Scientific Contributions to Child Development Award, and the Temple University Great Teacher Award. Hooray! Her research in the areas of early language development and infant cognition has resulted in 14 books and over 200 publications, including her book, Einstein Never Used Flashcards, How Children Really Learn and Why They Need to Play More and Memorize Less, which won the Books for Better Life Award and the New York Times bestseller, Becoming Brilliant, What Science Tells Us About Raising Successful Children. So without further ado, over to Dr. Yogman and Dr. Hirsh-Pasek, and I know you're going to enjoy this presentation.
Well, so thank you, Carol. Thank you, Lara. We're delighted to be with you and delighted to be co-presenting with my colleague, Kathy Hirsh-Pasek. And as Carol pointed out, one of the reasons for this report is that people have begun to take play for granted. The cutting back of recess, the lack of outdoor time for kids, people have begun to think that play is frivolous. And what I think the point we're going to make today is that kids need a breadth of skills, a range of skills, and playful learning is right at the top of that list. So we want to talk a little bit about the effects of play, play with caregivers, peers, and teachers, and across the board with many adult caregivers is brain building. It enhances brain structure and function. That's my first point. My second point is that playful learning is a fundamental part of, actually let me move the slides, there we go. Playful learning is a fundamental part of healthy development and is crucial for 21st century skills such as executive function, collaboration, and innovation. And finally, my third point, and this is really critical, is that play helps build the safe, nurturing relationships with all caregivers that mitigate toxic stress and promote resilience. And I want to give a shout out to all of the people that work in children's museums, because your role at promoting that kind of healthy relationship between children and caregivers is critical, absolutely critical, and play is the way to get there. So my first point about play's effect on the brain, we know mostly from animal data that certainly supports hypothesis generations in humans, that play influences the size of the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, essential brain areas for the development of executive function. Secondly, play enhances dendritic complexity and promotes the neuronal growth factor. And finally, there have been documented epigenetic changes in brain-derived neurotrophic factor genes. So we have lots of reasons for thinking that play is really important for brain anatomy. What are the characteristics of play? It's been hard to define, but I think we can characterize certain characteristics. It's intrinsically motivated, it's child-directed, it's active, engaging, and meaningful, and as children's museums know well, it's that experience of joyful discovery that's so powerful when children and parents engage in play. and it's usually socially interactive. There are a variety of kinds of play. We can talk about attunement between parents and infants in the first few months of life, starting very early, that back and forth dance that parents and children engage in. We can talk about object play as kids begin interested in blocks or Tupperware or wooden spoons. We can talk about physical play, most commonly rough and tumble play.
No water?
I'm fine. Okay. We can talk about imaginary play and storytelling, the importance of not only reading to children, but of getting them to engage in telling stories about what they're reading. And the kind of pretend play, the dress-up play. But we want to focus in particular on guided play and playful learning. And we're going to go into much more detail about that when Kathy talks about learning landscapes. And finally, outdoor play, which has certainly been in great jeopardy for children from low-income environments where playgrounds are increasingly unsafe. Now, we want to talk about different kinds of play. And we'll go into more detail about this little schema. But what's really critical is that children have a chance to direct their play. So you can see that in free play, the child may initiate and direct it. It may not have an explicit learning goal, but guided play or playful learning, the adult may have a goal, but the child still directs the play. And very much the case in games with older children, like Simon says. But in contrast to the direct instruction that happens in school, often stressful work on preparing kids to taking tests, where children really have no role in directing their play. Now, secondly, what are the kinds of skills that children develop through play? Well, they certainly develop the cognitive and language skills, but we think what is unique about play is the social emotional skills, the self-regulation skills that build executive function, task persistence, problem solving, resolving disputes with words, building a pro-social brain. You can see that play really encourages the promotion of the whole child and not just isolated skills. Most important, as we look to the skills that CEOs are looking for in an adult workforce, the combination of creativity, innovation, collaboration, and collaborative problem solving that play enables are exactly what is critical for the 21st century skills. And Kathy and I were thrilled to see an article in the New York Times News of the Week in Review after our paper came out that even suggested play was a way to damp down the kind of partisan rancor that encourages that's so prevalent in our political system, that encouraging kids to engage in playful collaboration might be a way to encourage healthier communication. One of the occupational hazards of being a pediatrician is frequent colds, so you can see that I'm recovering from one. Okay, now we want to talk about relationships, because I think that is really critical. And what's really important is how play promotes safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. The mutual joy, the shared communication, these serve and return interactions in the first few months of life that parents and children can experience during play really regulate the body's stress response and are even more important with children exposed to adversity. The ability of parents to pay attention to nonverbal cues in the very earliest months of life are a marvelous way for play interventions to take a really supportive role in early parenting. I love an old quote from George Bernard Shaw, who said that we don't stop playing because we grow old, but we grow old because we stop playing. So here are some examples of the early 3 to 6 month attunement, back and forth social interactions. Again, emphasizing the role of play in mitigating stress and adversity and promoting resilience. The role of social play is really critically important in that domain. And for those of you not familiar with the concept of levels of stress, this just outlines some of our scientific data about the difference between positive stress, which is normal and encourages coping, with tolerable stress, which is serious temporary stress, but buffered by supportive relationships, as opposed to toxic stress, where the prolonged activation of the stress response systems in the absence of protective relationships has such adverse long-term impacts on brain function, on chronic adult illness, on mental health problems, on a host of educational and adverse health outcomes. So one of the conclusions of this paper is encouraging pediatricians to write a prescription for play, encouraging parents to play with their children every day, to not consider play frivolous, and to emphasize the power of their relationship through play. It's really a value statement. One could argue that this is obvious, but for many people, it's not obvious. And so this is a real value statement by pediatricians to say that play is important. Don't neglect it. Another way to think about the role of play is to think about 3 principles to improve outcomes for children and families. So we can talk about supporting responsive relationships, where play is a critical component. We can talk about strengthening core life skills, both in adults and children, executive function skills that we talked about, and finally reducing sources of stress. So it's now my great pleasure to turn the talk over to my colleague, Kathy Hirsh-Pasek.
Thanks, Michael. Well, hi, everybody. It's so nice to meet you digitally. And I can't wait to continue the conversation. Michael laid out so many of the points that are in the paper that we thought it might be a great idea to give you an example. Now, you already have a good example because children's museums are about the best example there are. But right now, what I want to talk to you about is what would happen if we moved the children's museum outside. So we're calling it Playful Learning Landscapes. And the idea is about transforming cityscapes into opportunities for playful learning. Now, you already heard from Michael that there are many, many types of play. And I think part of the problem we've had in the past is that we just thought it was play or it was work. And of course, we now realize that play may be the work of childhood and that play is far from anything frivolous. But of course, one type of play, what we've been calling guided play, is being seriously looked at in the literature right now, in the scientific literature. And what we're coming up with are so many things that you're getting when you're playing with another person. And that's probably true as adults too. Oh yes, you can get outcomes in language and literacy. You can get outcomes in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Critical thinking, executive function, which is the fancy term for attention, memory, and self-regulation, and those all important social skills that we are largely losing in today's society. In fact, a new report just came out with middle school principals said, for the first time ever, by the way, suggested that the emotional health of the kids is the #1 priority today. So what we'd like to do next, whoops, it looks like I lost my scene here. Okay, what we'd like to do next is to ask whether we could infuse guided play with that learning goal, with that social goal, into the everyday spaces. Would it be possible at home, at the bus stop, in the world at large, to literally shape environments that could encourage guided play in the same way that children's museums do every single day. Given that children only spend 20% of their waking time in school, the question we pose to all of you is, what are we doing with the other 80% of the child's waking time? The initiative that we're talking about would sit at the juncture of the child development movement and the global cities movement. So all of you out there who are thinking about or playing with ideas of city revitalization, and at the same time talking about education, imagine what it would be like to carve some space right in the middle. We started with a simple question. When is a bench not a bench? What could we do with a simple bench to build in opportunities for guided play? And what our vision became is represented in our new video.
Learning Landscapes lies at the juncture of the global cities movement and of early education, and we embrace the science of learning to help every single child have the greatest potential to succeed. It's about redoing cities and finding opportunities where we can have a little more fun and a little more learning going on. We are at the Please Touch Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This is Parkopolis, the human-sized board game to help kids play with and learn about math and science.
When we were developing Parkopolis, we did a deep dive in the literature to pull out what are the most important things that young children need to be learning for science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM skills.
It feeds deeply into our commitment as a leading 21st century children's museum to be a partner in research that is helping the world understand how and when children learn best.
The science of Playberry, it's about finding ways to build in more literacy, to enhance language skills.
A lot has changed. The aesthetic changed. It's a lot brighter in here now. There's more of a circular atmosphere, so the children come in, sit down, see what the books are, climb the wall. Physical development adds for a mental improvement. It allows them to understand about setting goals, accomplishing those goals, which goes into school.
It gets kids to want to come to the library.
Playwall is a giant chalkboard wall that says, when I was little, I loved to play. And then it prompts people to write down however they loved to play when they were little.
People walk up and they'll read the question and they'll think, what's something I played when I was a kid? And then you'll see them smile because now they're in touch with a memory. Okay. And they'll write it down, and it kind of seems like it makes their day good.
What we know is that when people are talking about play, they start to understand the connection between play and learning.
Urban Thinkscape is a project that attempts to take places in the world and turn them into opportunities for parents and children to talk to each other and to engage in playful learning together.
This project, it was introduced in the Belmont community, and everyone's hands went up. I want it, I want it, I want it.
Urban Thinkscape is to take public spaces like bus stops and transform them so that it is imbued with learning opportunities.
There are 4 installations. The point of Puzzle Wall is that it's going to foster spatial skills, and we know that spatial skills are important for later math skills. There's 2 different runs of jumping feet. And then we have a little sign that suggests, okay, can you put 1 foot where there's 2 feet and 2 feet where there's 1 foot? So that's building some executive function skills.
The big vision for Learning Landscapes is a very big vision. We are looking for opportunities to take the everyday and make it extraordinary.
Now, don't you just think every children's museum should have a play wall outside? I do. And somebody asked in the middle what is happening in some of the cities and police and crime, and I'll just say a little bit about it. You know, you would not believe how much fun this is to watch people in some of the very under-resourced neighborhoods. You put these things up and all of a sudden they're protected by the community because the community owns them. So it's really quite exciting. So what have we found so far? Well, our first example was what we called the ultimate block party. We had 28 science-inspired activities and we took over Central Park in New York. The year was 2010. Over 10 million people were reached by some of the press that we put out, and a full 50,000 people showed up in Central Park that day. And what happened? We got an increase in parents' attitudes to the relationship between play and learning. People started to see the connection. Example 2, the supermarket study. We went into supermarkets and we put those signs up in under-resourced communities. And what did we find when we just tried to prompt things by saying, did you know that language helps your brain grow? How many roles do you see? And when we got people talking about, I'm a cow, there's milk in that yogurt. What else might have milk? The kids and the parents started talking. In fact, in the under-resourced neighborhoods, we got a 33% increase in caregiver-child interaction and language. Think about that. You talk about building relationships and building language happening right there at the supermarket or at the corner store where you have to go anyway. And we just recently had a replication where we added STEM language and got exactly the same results. Our third example was urban thingscape. We transformed a bus stop in an under-resourced area of Philadelphia. Over 100 community members participated in building the site, and it was built to the kind of specs that they wanted in the community. In fact, the community members also served as our trained data ambassadors. And the results? We got a 30% increase in the amount of conversations that families were having. The cell phones went down, and even when we compared what was going on in urban thingscape to the local playground, we found out that there was more conversation and more conversation that included stories, numbers, all the things you hope that parents and children will start talking about. Absolutely amazing increases. Parkopolis. Parkopolis was our life-size board game. It was designed to foster early mathematical skills and scientific reasoning. Look closely at this slide. And you may see that for this, we even changed what dice look like. We have one die, that's the 1 to 6 that you're used to. The other has fractions represented. So when you roll these dice, you can go 3.5 spaces or 4 3/4 spaces. There was a STEM exhibit going on right next door. It was a rocket building activity. Very exciting. The kids loved it. But Parkopolis stimulated lots more number language, fraction language, pattern language, critical thinking, creativity, and even question asking than even the rocket example did, up by 36 to 60%. Example 5, at the Play and Learn, which was in Philadelphia, when the Philadelphia Free Library redid some of the libraries and kindly asked us to participate, we found that in a library, if you put some numbers and letters on the climbing wall, all of a sudden, kids try to spell words. The interaction among children and adults, much greater. Number and spatial language, up. And guess what else? People started getting more cards for the library and putting their cell phones down. It was amazing. So across the experiment so far, it looks as if we can actually encourage guided play in public spaces through architectural design. We can enhance the other 80% of waking time that children spend outside of school. And parents and children can increase the very behaviors that are brain-building skills for language, math, reading, literacy, and yes, those all-important social skills. We basically took the Children's Museum and put it out in the world. And if you want to see a little bit more about this, you can indeed go onto my personal website, kathyhirshpasek.com, and you can find it under Learning Landscapes. Expansion and scaling, gosh, we've been approached by a lot of cities. We just started going to Chicago, where we're starting 3 neighborhoods in Chicago. We've been asked by the mayor of Seattle to do safe sidewalks to school, where we're going to use some of the stuff we used in Parkopolis and some of the stuff that we used in the urban Thinkscape. We've been approached by people in Denver. Couldn't you do something with low-income housing? What about hospital waiting rooms in Philadelphia, in Boston, in New York, in Madison, Wisconsin? Anybody think about what we could do in rethinking the way jails look? And we're doing supermarket in South Africa, working with initiatives like Urban 95 and others around the country. We want to ensure that our future is filled with family-friendly cities, and that as doctors give that prescription for play, there are public places people can go where they can actually carry out that play, both in the community and in their homes. Bottom line, we can reimagine everyday spaces and infuse them with what we know from the science of learning. We can put guided play to work in your community. Playful Learning Landscapes.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy and Michael, for being here. And we, of course, would be remiss if we didn't share a few examples of how children's museums already have been advocating for play in our communities, but have also responded directly to this policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And we'll be sharing examples, quick examples from 4 children's museums. And again, this is a great time to submit more of those questions into the chat. And I'll start with an introduction to Boston Children's Museum's Power of Play initiative. Since 2013, the Boston Children's Museum has used multiple vehicles to communicate about the power of play, including its website that has a Power of Play section that informs parents about the importance of play. The museum also has a Lunch and Learn event with guest speakers to talk about play and healthy development. The museum has hosted 3 showings of the 2015 documentary The Land about the importance of healthy risk-taking to a child's emotional, physical, and social development. They have also hosted the Power of Play Festival, a free outdoor hands-on play event, both inside and outside the museum, with a loose parts playground tent, sidewalk math, and all of the museum's engaging exhibits. They also hold the Everybody Plays Summer event, which shares different ways that people can play together in your street, city, and around the world. And finally, they also host a parents' play night, which helps to reintroduce adults to that play that we know is so important, and where they get to play without the kids, which we know is critical for getting them to play with their kids. Also on the Boston Children's Museum website is a list of 100 ways to play that parents can use to ignite the curiosity of their children with everyday objects. Another example we'd like to share is work started by the Children's Museum of Tacoma, who expanded an existing relationship with pediatricians in their area, specifically in response to the AAP article that we were just introduced to by Dr. Yogman. And so they have been working with local pediatricians and health systems to encourage pediatricians to write a prescription for play. And they've been working specifically with the Mary Bridge Children's Hospital. And this opportunity actually built on an existing relationship, as we said, encouraging parents to invite their children to play. And this offering, as you can see, is focused branding that provides a direct invitation to play at home and reference support and resources from the Children's Museum. The Children's Museum of Minnesota also launched on October 1st a pilot project in partnership with Reach Out and Read Minnesota and the West Side Community Health Services Organization. And the recommendations from the AAP policy paper reference Reach Out and Read and the partnership and initiative that has already existed to encourage pediatricians to issue a prescription for reading in the earliest years. And Minnesota's partnership builds directly on this initiative to provide a faster on-ramp for pediatricians who are already familiar with participating and supporting in Reach Out and Read to invite parents to reach out and play by adding a play packet to their Reach Out and Read materials. And this is a brand new project. And the way they are implementing this in Minnesota is through developing this new play packet that includes a book called Look at You, a card with play information and tips for parents, information about free museum membership. And what's critical around access to this implementation is that all of the materials are available in 3 languages, the 3 predominant languages in the Twin Cities area: English, Spanish, and Hmong. And next, we'll move on to a statewide initiative in the state of Wisconsin that is shared by more than 14 children's museums. 10 years ago, Wisconsin's Children's Museum leaders began meeting regularly to share knowledge and support the field's development in the state. And this fall, leaders focused in on the new prescription for play recommendations provided by AAP in August. Wisconsin's 14 children's museums decided to embark on a statewide awareness campaign to share the findings widely and change the conversation about play in the state. And they created a branded initiative called Prescription for Play. And the initiative is centered around the question, what are you doing locally to sustain this conversation around play? The initiative includes clear objectives for leveraging community relationships to sustain this conversation, branded messaging with beautiful graphics, including this logo that we see, joint press release and coordinated social media strategies among this network, a shared media toolkit that allows for creative implementation at each museum, and you can see how they're playing that out in staff wardrobe, etc. And all of the above are being supported by robust partnerships with local physicians. And so we can see the direct connection, as Dr. Yogman and Dr. Hirsh-Pasek have noted at the beginning of our webinar, around this message with children's museums. And we're so grateful that they were here to share their insights and introduce us to their findings. And now we will move on to our Q&A period. We've received a number of requests from our audience that I will present to you all. And again, we still have time to explore these, to receive some more questions. The first question, actually, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Yogman, is at the very beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that you've seen epigenetic changes. And I wondered if you could just explain that a little bit to our crowd that may not be aware of what that means.
So it's mostly animal data, but comparing usually rodents that have either been deprived of play or have experienced play one can see methylation of genes that basically improve function in the rats that had additional play exposure. And so what happens with epigenetic changes in genes as opposed to replication is that the environment we know can influence the expression of gene proteins by methylating the gene, changing the conformation, and then enabling a protein that may produce an enzyme that enhances function. And so that's the underlying genetic explanation for some of these improvements in brain function, in executive function skills, in a host of benefits of play.
Great. Thank you for unpacking that for us. Another question that we got that I think is a really critical question is we had a question from the crowd around the difference between learning and play. And Kathy, I wonder if that might be teed up just for you.
Well, the difference in learning and play, I'm not sure there is much of a difference really in learning and play because we're always learning when we're doing and when we're playing. And I think we've created this kind of false dichotomy that I wish we could do away with. I think there are times when we're learning and it's not playful at all. We probably all remember sitting in a classroom where it's kind of what we affectionately call drill and kill. And I remember feeling that way when I was studying for my SAT words. You know, I would go through them and memorize them and go through them and memorize them. But truthfully, I didn't really know what syzygy meant. And I think had it been more fun and used in a sentence and I had engaged it, and that's precisely what we're learning in the field of psychology and the science of learning. When it's active rather than passive, when it's engaging rather than distracting, when it's meaningful rather than meaningless, when it's socially interactive, rather than solo. That doesn't mean you can't learn solo or have fun solo. Then you actually learn better. Your brain learns better. And so you can have a lot of different kinds of learning, bad learning and good learning. And I think as long as play is oriented toward a kind of learning goal, that's just for guided play, because it's great to have free play too. Then we have the kind of play that sticks, or the kind of learning that sticks. So if the question is, what's the difference in sticky learning and non-sticky learning? It's whether you're bored to death or whether you're actually getting something that's fun and that you want to do.
Thank you. Thank you. And so another question that we received, I think, is for you, Dr. Yogman, is what has the reception been to this paper from pediatricians?
It's been positive beyond my fondest expectations and dreams. Originally, when I started working on the paper, and a lot of this came through my observations when I was on the board and chair of the board of the Children's Museum, I thought it would be an uphill battle to convince the Academy to, support a policy statement saying that pediatricians should write a prescription for play. But I think it's been wonderfully positive. I think people are tired of only highlighting deficits, and to have a positive message that you can actually enjoy some time with your child rather than feeling like you have to schedule every minute, rather than feeling like you have to increase their stress and anxiety. I think pediatricians are increasingly seeing children with behavioral concerns, and to be able to step back and say, there's some healthy aspects of playing with your child that are protective, that help their brain function, that help them learn to collaborate with other children. I think pediatricians have been incredibly welcoming and eager to implement that. And our next step is now to go forward and take some of the ideas that we heard from other children's museums to give pediatricians specific advice on how to implement this in their offices, in waiting rooms, and hospital waiting rooms.
Great, thank you. Let's see. A second question that we have is, and I think Kathy, this would go to you very likely, is do you have ideas for how families and teachers can incorporate these environmentally guided play principles on a household or classroom scale?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, in our house, we used to make everything into a game, you know, so whether it's building a fort, we could think of that as physics with your couch, or whether it's jumping off the bed to see how far you can go, even kind of measuring it and see who goes farther or who can jump higher. All these are games that we play kind of every day. Anyone ever play the alphabet game? Well, I used to play the alphabet game a lot. And I'll give you a funny story. In our house, we used to have, I was always late, it seems, getting home. And so that meant dinner was always something that you had to figure out very quickly. And I would ask my kids, oh my God, what do you want for dinner? Give me your best argument, and that's how we'll decide. So it was a game we played. It was called Make Your Best Argument for Dinner. And one kid only ever wanted pizza. I don't know how he grew up to be 28 and looking healthy, but he only, I swear, ever ate Blanche foods. And he said, well, I learned that in the 5-paragraph essay by playing the game, Make Your Best Argument for Food. I knew that I had to make the argument, give you 3 reasons why that was what we were going to have for dinner, and then do a closer. And there it was. We had cheese, we had tomatoes, and by God, if we didn't get our starch in. So if you make a lot of these into fun things that you do with the everyday, all of a sudden the playful learning kind of pops out of the normal environment. And, you know, you can even make great games with construction paper and just put them down in a row and put stuff on it that you have to do. Maybe it's jump 3 times. Maybe it's hop from the blue to the green. All of these are up for grabs once you start thinking this way.
You know, in the pediatric office, kids are often frightened because they're getting so many vaccines. So a perfect antidote is to go out to the waiting room and build a tower with blocks.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the climate changes.
Yeah. And we're even thinking about, you know, Michael and I were just talking today, in fact, about, my gosh, couldn't you do something with pediatrician waiting rooms? I mean, you sure could. So we're thinking about putting playful learning landscapes right there in the waiting rooms so that kids can reduce stress, have more fun, and maybe get something fun out of it, and even learning.
That's great. I have a question that I think is up for grabs for both of you.
Yeah.
I had a question about knowledge around whether play in early childhood contributes to mental health in adulthood, positive mental health in adulthood.
Well, I certainly think it does. I think that we know a lot about the impact of adversity on behavioral concerns and behavioral problems. And I think to the degree that play helps support the parent-child relationship, that's really critical to buffering adversity and to promoting mental health. I think that the less good science about the way that brain function and executive function skills, support mental health, but take something quite as simple as kids playing a game called Simon Says. Yeah. What kids are learning when they play Simon Says is how to inhibit activity in response to questions from the leader. That's really what learning to focus, learning to pay attention in school is all about. So all of these things are really basic to the kind of that, as we talk about playful learning, it's not a dichotomy. They are enjoying themselves, they are learning, and I think they are mitigating stress and promoting mental health.
And I just read something on my way to DC, in fact, that suggested that kids are not having as much relationship building moments anymore. In fact, this was a stunning statistic. I haven't checked it, but oh my gosh. It said that in the first 7 years of a child's life, they've already spent the equivalent of one of those years in front of a screen. And a lot of the time that our kids are spending in front of those screens is solo time, almost babysitting time. And I think that we can do better. And what play does do is it kind of creates the perfect environment for having the back and forth relationships that, by the way, makes us happier as a parent. It's not just about the kid. You know, put your cell phone down. We have fabulous research with 2-year-olds where when the parent picks up the cell phone, the kid goes bazonkers, because what is it saying to our kids? It's saying, I'd rather be on this thing than looking in your eyes. Not fair. And I actually did a stint the other day for 2020. And wouldn't you know, we just had 3 kids come in just to see if we'd get the effect. Well, boy, did we get the effect on every single kid who came in. And one of the kids decided to just hightail it out of there. And he said, you're not paying attention to me. I'm going to go play. So we have to watch what we do as parents. I almost think that there's a phenomenon out there, which I'm calling a new disease, right, called secondhand screens, kind of like secondhand smoke, that they're in our background. They're everywhere. And maybe what we need to do for just 2 minutes a day is to recognize the joy of what a relationship is and looking into the eyes of our children again. How wonderful would that be? So yeah, I think that we have to be careful here. I don't know that it's well studied as a phenomenon, but I do think that, you know, let the buyer beware. Maybe we should be more cautious about having playful moments that we know do build healthy children and healthy brains.
And I think we have time for maybe just 1 or 2 more questions. A question that just came in is a question around, is there any, or are you aware of, differences in impact of play across different demographics? So are there different types of play or activities that maybe are more meaningful or more prevalent around different kinds of demographic diversity?
We have not seen that in our research. It looks like good old play is good old play, and that you know, there's a joy factor, there's a relationship factor, no matter where we look. In a lot of our personal studies, we are looking in under-resourced communities, and what we're finding is sometimes stunning. Our most recent finding actually shows that in these communities, young children learn as much vocabulary, again, in a guided play situation as they do in a more focused reading situation. So it looks like if we couple some of the reading the books with playful games, we're really optimizing how much kids learn and the fun that they can have while they're doing it. I just have to share one more metaphor, if I may. It comes from Carole Rinaldi, who is the head of the Reggio Foundation. And she came in one day looking like this, and she said, you know, play is really important. And it's almost as if you can think of learning as one wing of the butterfly and play as the other. And she said, for the butterfly to fly, it needs both.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I do think one other comment, though, that is out there is that the opportunities for play likely differ across demographics, but very much situated in socioeconomics and urban environments.
Yeah, I wanna stop you there because I've heard that before. And a lot of parents are very busy and carrying a number of jobs. I'm asking for 2 minutes a day. Give me 2 minutes a day. Even people who have 3 jobs have 2 minutes a day where they can look in the eyes of their kids. And when they wake that up and they see the fire in their child's eyes and they feel the way they are going to feel by having put that cell phone down for a little bit. We're not talking about, oh my gosh, you have to put aside 3 hours. No, I agree. And by the way, you'd be surprised to find that the same phenomenon is occurring not only in the rather under-resourced communities, but also in the over-resourced communities that don't have time for play. Give me 2 minutes a day.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that for impoverished families who may not have safe outdoor play spaces to bring their kids, often are resigned to having their kids sit in front of a TV. I think to replace that with 2 minutes of play, not with any expensive toy, but with wooden spoons, with wooden blocks, with leftover dishes. It's amazing how imaginative kids can be with those simple objects. And I think parents I can't emphasize enough how important it is for parents to re-experience the joy of their own playful experiences from their childhood. That same thing that happens when they read some of their favorite childhood stories to their children.
Well, I think that, I don't know how we can top 2 minutes of play.